Good evening. Tonight I will be discussing my research on the betterment of interfaith dialogues in society today. My thesis statement is that we can really use interfaith dialogues to pursue religious truth when we prioritize grace and clarity. See, we live in a very strange time. We live in a day where, if I wanted to, I could talk to someone who lived all the way in Japan just by hopping on Snapchat, say. But even though we're increasingly more connected over the internet to people who live far away, people who we may never even meet in real life, somehow we find it harder to have real conversations with the people that we actually know. Our ability to communicate is greatly enhanced through the internet, but our ability to actually have conversations with people has greatly diminished. Because of this, we find it very hard today to have meaningful conversations about sensitive topics. These conversations that surround, say, politics become fights, highly emotional battles between people who really aren't interested in finding the truth. They're just interested in either winning a debate or defending their feelings. This style of online discussion that is more interested in clicks and views and owning people is now dominating real-life conversations. And one of the areas this has undeniably impacted is religious conversations. Religious conversations have taken a massive downturn because the way that the internet has propped up these kind of dialogues has completely changed the perspective of many people and how these conversations should be taken out. But I believe that if we return to a style of dialogue that promotes grace and clarity, these conversations that many today think are needless or actually harmful can really become a tool for us to pursue religious truth. Now, that's probably the first thing I'll have to address. What do I mean by religious truth? Well, it's very popular today to believe that all religions are kind of many paths to one truth, or that every religion has their own perspective on truth, but no religion is necessarily true on its own. However, when we examine the data, we find that this couldn't be farther from the truth. As a matter of fact, every religion cannot be equally true as some people believe today. This is because major religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which will be the focus of today's presentation, make contradictory claims that by definition cannot be equally true. And a way to very easily demonstrate this is by looking at the person of Jesus in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Jesus is a very influential figure in history, of course, and in religion especially. Jesus is the central figure of the Christian faith. They believe that he is the incarnate Son of God who come down from heaven, born of the Virgin Mary, who gave his life on the cross as a ransom for sins and then rose from the dead. Jews, however, do not share this belief. Jews do not believe that Jesus is the incarnate Son of God. They do not believe that he rose from the dead. They do not believe that he was the Messiah, as Christians believe. And Muslims, likewise, though they believe that he was born of a virgin, though they believe that he was the Messiah, many of them do not believe that he was crucified. They do not believe that he was risen from the dead. And they do not believe that he was God in the flesh, like the Orthodox Christians do. Now, to highlight this, Christian apologist and ex-Muslim Nabil Qureshi notes in his book, No God But One, Allah or Jesus, he says, to say that all religions are true is to say that none of them are true, because they all make exclusive claims that contradict one another. What he means here is that if Christianity claims one thing and Islam claims another, either Christianity is true and Islam is false, or Islam is true and Christianity is false, or they're both false. Contradictory claims cannot at the same time be true. He goes on later in the book to say, the more that I studied the origins of these two religions, the more I realized that they are not just two different paths to the same God. They are two different paths to two different versions of God, and they cannot both be true. He also says, if Jesus was not crucified, then Christianity is a lie. But if he was crucified, the Quran cannot be the word of God. There is no middle ground. And we can see this even further when we apply the law of excluded middle as outlined by Stanford University. They say the law of excluded middle means that something is either true or false. A proposition, a statement, say Jesus is the Son of God, is either true or it is false. There is no middle ground of kind of true and kind of false. It's either a true statement or it's not a true statement. And so we see that different religions are different religions because they are different, and they cannot at the same time be true. Likewise, atheism and non-belief cannot coincide with religious expression or with religious teaching, because not believing something because you don't believe it's true is an implicit claim that it isn't true. And so an atheist and a Christian cannot both at the same time be correct, because atheism contradicts Christianity. Now, how does this speak to the matter of interfaith dialogue? Well, as you probably know, if you've heard a preacher preach, or if you've read any section of the Quran or of the Talmud, you probably know that most major religions, especially the big three monotheistic religions, the Judaism, Christianity, Islam, say that the punishment for non-belief and disobedience is great. That in Judaism, breaking God's law; in Christianity, breaking God's law and rejecting Jesus as Messiah; and in Islam, rebelling against the Prophet Muhammad, are punishable offenses that will be rewarded with judgment and hell. So, given the reality that not all religions can be true, and given the reality that these religions claim the punishment for not believing in them is death and judgment, it seems only right that we would test out, we would investigate these religions. And I think that religious dialogues, interfaith dialogues, provide an avenue for investigating these religious claims, whether they're from believers or non-believers, so that we can actually reach the truth. The first thing then that we need to focus on is grace. We need grace. The first reason we need grace in these conversations is because religious beliefs are closely tied to personal identity. I think we understand this, that someone's identity as a Jew or as a Christian or as a Muslim is inherent to who they are. And this makes interfaith dialogues inherently tense. Isabella Poggi, in her work, defined offense as a blow to our image or our self-image. And when religious beliefs are held very dearly to someone that they identify as a Jew or a Christian, as a Muslim, challenging those beliefs can very quickly feel like a challenge of the person. And so we need to prioritize grace so that we can navigate that tense window. Second, we have to separate the person from the quote-unquote problem. As we pursue grace, this allows us to make a distinction between our disagreements over theology and our love for the person. Furthermore, grace is actually the way that many religious texts encourage their believers to go and spread the message of their faith. In the Bible, 1 Peter 3, verse 15 through 16, which is said to be the flagship verse of apologetics, says this. It says, "Sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense for the faith that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and fear, having a good conscience." And the Quran likewise says, "Invite all to the way of thy Lord with wisdom and beautiful preaching. Argue with them in the way that is best and most gracious." So we see that not only is there a clear and obvious psychological need for grace, that people hold these things very dearly, and so challenging them is a very tender subject, but also the various texts of Christianity, Islam, there are also texts in the Old Testament that Jews would look to say that, yeah, grace is something that we need. And this is something that we have lost today with the debate me bro, clickbait culture of basically everything online, but especially of religious dialogue. This idea of grace, going in and saying, "I care for you," has been completely lost. And I want to look at what it means to be gracious, defining a gracious attitude. The first thing that we need, I think very clearly, is love. We need to have an attitude of charity and of goodwill towards our interlocutor, to use a higher level term. The person we're talking to isn't just a debate opponent. They're not just someone that we're trying to beat in an argument. They should be someone that we actually want the best for. The second thing we need to do is we need to value them. We need to recognize that this person is worth something. That as a Christian, I would say this person is made in the image of God, whether or not they believe in the gospel. That no matter what they believe, my heart is for them as a fellow human being. And last, we need to have a view of protection. We want to protect this relationship, that although various religious texts like the Bible and the Quran do say that we need to prioritize our faith over our human relationships, there's also many commands throughout the Bible, for instance, to say that no, you want to live in a way that is well received by the people around you. We want to protect these relationships so that we can continue to have these conversations later. But what I see online is people who are not looking to protect their relationship, but looking to protect their platform, protect views, protect subscriber counts. And that just completely doesn't work. So very clearly, from human psychology to, I think, common sense to the various instructions in the Bible, Quran, and in the Old Testament, tell us that grace is something we need to return to. Secondly, we should talk about the need for clarity. I think there's two kinds of clarity that we can look at as we kind of think about what's best for these interfaith dialogues. The first is technical clarity. What I mean by that is being clear about what you are saying and trying to understand what you're hearing. Religion is a very confusing topic. I mean, there are so many vocabulary words, there are so many documents, there are so many different sects of each religion that it can be a whirlwind. Even scholars have to study for years, decades, and they're always learning new things because it's a deep well. It's a very, very confusing topic. And so when we're having these conversations that surround religious beliefs, we need to ensure that, one, when we're presenting our beliefs, we're doing so in a clear, articulate manner so they can understand what we're saying. And second, most importantly, I think, when we're on the listening end, we need to listen with the intent of learning, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. The second kind of clarity we need to have is what I would call motivational clarity. We need to put our cards on the table. We need to be clear and upfront as to why are we here? Why are we having this conversation? And how serious of an issue do we think that this disagreement is? This kind of clarity will help to set a framework, set a groundwork, set an expectation for how the conversation is going to go. If I'm talking to someone who's maybe even a fellow believer, and I say, hey man, I disagree with you about this, we can set the framework and say, we're still brothers, I still love you, I still want to encourage you in your faith, but I want to talk about this in a meaningful way. If I'm talking to a non-believer, I can go to them and say, hey man, look, I'm gonna be straight with you. I think that you're walking in a way that is going to end you up in hell. That's not a fun thing to say to someone, but it sets the expectation. It sets the framework, so you're not hiding from that. You're not hiding your intentions. Transparency and honesty plays a huge role in gaining trust and in building clarity. So how do we go forward? I've identified 6 steps that we need to make so that we can go forward in our interfaith dialogues. The first happens before the dialogue even starts. The first thing to do is self-reflection. You have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Identify your end goal before you speak. Is your goal maybe to just have them think about something? Is your goal to convert them on the spot? Is your goal to explore their own ideas? You need to have an understanding within yourself of what you're here to do so that you can be clear to them and so that you can guide the conversation down the road you're looking for. The second thing also happens before these dialogues, and that's preparation. If you're preparing to have a discussion with someone, make sure that you know what you believe. Make sure that you're able to articulate it. Make sure that you are able to tell them exactly what this is and what this means, and also see if you can try to learn about them first. See if you can build some common ground by learning about what they believe. If you know that they're a Muslim or a Mormon or a Jew or a Christian, maybe read up on some basic things and say, hey, I want to really know what you believe, and so I'm going to prepare. Now, the third thing is what happens when we get into the conversations. And this is huge. You have to speak clearly. Don't hide behind overly polite language. It's actually more damaging to the conversation if you're too polite. If you're too polite, one, you're not being clear about your motivational clarity, and you're just not going to be able to articulate what you really need. I mean, if you speak around terms like, as a Christian, if I speak around terms like hell and judgment, one, I'm not being faithful to the text, and two, I'm not letting them know what I actually think. And that destroys our ability to actually have clear conversations. The fourth thing, this is very, very important and very, very hard to do, is we need to remove emotional impulses. We need to separate the person from the quote-unquote problem, and we need to make sure that when they critique our beliefs, because they are going to do that, we need to be ready for that, When they critique our beliefs, we don't see it as an attack of ourselves. We need to separate the emotional impulse from the conversation so that we can have a clear engagement. The fifth thing, again, very, very important, is a willingness to learn. A willingness to learn. Dialogue requires a desire to understand what the other person is saying and why. Now, a willingness to learn does not necessarily mean that you're willing to convert. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going in there and you're leaving your own faith at the floor. But what it means is that you're willing to learn not just about the technicalities of their religion or of their beliefs, but also that you're willing to learn about their life story, why they believe this, and that builds trust. That builds a relationship, and it makes sure that the next time you connect, after you've listened to them and after these conversations develop, you'll be able to speak with more clarity. And you'll be able to have more grace because now you see them as a person, not just an opponent. And the sixth thing is to know when to walk away. Look, it can be very easy to fall into this tense, win it now, end the conversation now, I want you to convert on the spot. That is not helpful. That is not healthy. We need to know when to stop these conversations because they're not going any further. We need to make our final statement, reaffirm that we see our fellow discussioner as a human being, as someone that we love and care for, and we need to preserve the relationship for future discussions. Maybe say, hey man, I've really enjoyed this discussion and I would love to continue by exploring this topic. Or I would love to send you some resources over text if you'd like to read them. Or I'd love to hear from you maybe in a couple of weeks after I have some time to read and recollect my thoughts. Know when to walk away. In summary, interfaith dialogue, although what it may appear to be online, it is not about winning an argument. It's about a serious pursuit of religious truth, and I think it's a very powerful mechanism for pursuing religious truth, but we need to prioritize grace and clarity. Grace preserves that human connection that keeps relationships alive and that actually makes your points stronger. When someone can hear the intention and the affection behind your words, it only makes you more persuasive. The second thing is clarity. Clarity ensures that the truth is actually being discussed and sought after. Clarity about what you believe, both being able to articulate it well, and then clarity about what you think and what your purposes are. I think by implementing these 6 steps I outlined, we can accurately cultivate conversations that prioritize grace and clarity, and we can turn interfaith dialogues into a great way to pursue the truth about God, about the world, about anything that we might disagree over. If we prioritize grace and clarity, we can actually get to the truth. I'm so glad that you took the time to listen to me today. I thank you for your time and for your attention. Have a great night.